We're looking at the history of Islam. This is brand new material that's been coming out. Well, it's been around for about 100 years in Germany, but we're only getting it in the English-speaking world in the last 10 years. And more specifically, as much as the Germans will give us. They're very careful because this is you'll see it's very controversial, and it devastates Islam, and the Germans are not willing to really go public with this because they're nothing more than academics. Most of the Germans I work with are not Christians. They would call themselves Christians, Lutherans or whatever, but they don't really go to church. And for them, they tend to be linguists. They tend to be people who understand 10, 20 languages, much more than I could understand, but because of the fact that they've been working with the text at a much earlier age and been looking at the sources of Islam, the origins of Islam, longer and better than anybody else I know, we're using their material. And their material is proving to be devastating to Islam. Now we're getting a lot of reaction, both from Christians and Muslims, especially Muslims, but the Muslims, ironically, don't know how to respond to this material. You'll see why. Put yourself in their shoes as we go through it today. Christians, on the other hand, have just recently been taking me on and trying to shut this down. And I'll talk more about that, I think, tonight. You want me to go into that a little bit more tonight. There's some reasons for that. Because if we find that there is no man named Muhammad, or any book called the Quran, or any place called Mecca in the 7th century, then most of their careers go out the window. Because what are they going to attack? Who are they going to attack? Now, to me, that doesn't make any sense. Why they should be upset with that? To me, we should be rejoicing. But for many Christians, they see this as a threat to much of what they're doing. And my response to that is, listen, 99.9% of Muslims still believe Muhammad did exist. So continue to confront him. Continue to attack him. His sexual proclivities and his historical problems, but mostly his violence, because that's where we're having a problem today, is the violence of Islam modeled on him. So all the more continue those confrontations. So knowing that, let's go ahead and let's talk about who I am and why I even got into this whole area, because you need to get some background into my story to understand why I've spent the last 20 years actually the last 30 years on this material. And it started in 1992 for me. I was sent to London to take on the radical Muslims. A lot of radical Muslims in London, about 1 million Muslims in London, most from India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, because they're part of the Commonwealth, and so they have a free visa to get into India. It's not a problem for them to live there, and they are dominating the Muslim scene. About 70 to 80% of Muslims in Britain are from those three countries, which makes sense. If you look at the Muslim world today, the top 5 countries in the Muslim world, that means Muslim populations, are not Arab. Indonesia, 240 million. India, 220 million. Pakistan, 215 million. Bangladesh, 195 million. Nigeria, 124 million. You see what I'm talking about? Just take those 5 countries. None of them are Arab-speaking. 4 of them are in Asia, and one's in Africa. And those are the 5 largest Muslim countries on earth. So much of the debate has now moved away from the Arab world. In fact, there is no debate in the Arab world. We're not really getting confronted by Arabs. How many people know how many great Arab debaters that are confronting Christianity? No, they're not confronting us. They're confronting our countries. Israel is the problem for the Arab world, not Christianity. Because Christianity doesn't really exist very much in the Arab world. It's not a threat to Arabs. Where it is a threat to the Indian subcontinent, and it's certainly a threat in Nigeria. And I've just got back from Nigeria. I go to Nigeria every year because no one else will go to Nigeria. It's a dangerous place to go to. You've just seen 83% of all Christians killed worldwide are killed in Nigeria, just one country. And this is not getting out to the world. And I have to go there and I have to work up in the north where the Muslims are killing Christians. And so because of that, nobody really wants to deal with this new material. So I was sent in 1992 to take on these radical Muslims who were coming to London, and no one seemed to know how to deal with them. Well, that's my bread and butter. I grew up in India. I was born in India. My father was born in India. I'm third generation Mish kid from India. My parents have been in India since 1913. So for 100 years, we've been in India. They're still there. My sister's still there. And so because of that background, I have no fear of Islam. I have no fear of Muslims. In fact, they're my favorite people because I grew up in northern India where most of the Muslims are, surrounded by Muslims. I had roommates that were Muslims. I had classmates that were Muslims. And in our discussions in our school, it was always Christianity versus Islam. It was part of my DNA. So I've engaged with Muslims since I was yay high to a grasshopper. Knowing that, they wanted me in London to help with these more radical Muslims. And the first place we were asked to go to is to go down to Speaker's Corner. How many have been to London? Anybody here been to London? Have you been to Speaker's Corner? Any of you? You've been to Speaker's Corner. Have you seen me at Speaker's Corner? I was there for 25 years. I started in 1992. And Speaker's Corner is unique in the world. It's the only place on earth where you can say anything you want. And we do say anything we want. It's the bastion of freedom of speech. It's the only place that allows it. Now, there are two laws. You cannot slag off, used to be the Queen, now the King, and you cannot use any violence, both of which are broken every week, just because of the nature of the beast. But it's a great place to try out your new material. And so I was there back in 1992, and I started working at Speaker's Corner. The way it works at Speaker's Corner, you get up on these little kitchen ladders, just two rungs up, just so your head's above the crowd, so that you can be seen, and so you can be heard as well. And you cannot use any instruments, you cannot use any loudspeakers, you just have to use their voice, which gives me a huge advantage because I was born and grew up in the Himalayas, and so I would run up to school 500 feet to get to school every day and run back down if I forgot something and run back up again. So I have huge lungs. I have 5-liter lungs for a body that should only have 3.5 liters. So I've got 1.5 liters more than I need, which I think the Lord has given me just for Speaker's Corner, because I could yell anybody down there. And that's how I won most of my debates, not by content, just by sheer volume. But back in the 1990s, that was very important. We didn't have any debates. We didn't have any material. We had nothing to go against Islam. It was all defense, 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 defense. And that's probably all you've learned too, is apologetics, apologetics, apologetics. That's what defense is. That's the only thing we teach here in the United States or anywhere else in the world, apologetics. And even that is rarely taught because most people don't engage with Muslims, especially radical Muslims. And until you engage with radical Muslims, you're not going to need much defense. Because most Muslims here in the United States, I find, just know nothing about how to take on Christianity. Well, some do. But most of them just want to be nice. And most of the Muslims you meet are the nicest people you found. Am I correct? Most Muslims I meet here are just like a greengrocer down the street. And they're loving people. And they're amazing people. And they're the easiest people to work with. Because they do like to talk about the things I want to talk about. God bless them. As soon as I go up to a Muslim, I say, I believe Jesus is God and I believe the Bible is the Word of God. Do you have an opinion? I'm going to get 6 hours of opinion from them. They're the only people that'll sit and talk to me about those two subjects. That's why they're the easiest people to work with. You don't have to have any relationship with them. Just say those two things and you'll get a relationship. And the reason why is because they're looking for Christians that are like them, who want to talk about God. And they just can't find any Christians doing that because we're so timid and shy and scared to bring it up. We want to make all kinds of relationships as long as we have tea and coffee and talk about the weather and possibly maybe what's happening in people's lives. But we don't want to talk about God. Because we fear if we talk about God, we'll be stepping on their toes. Which is the one thing they're waiting for you to talk about. They want to talk about God. Why don't we want to talk about God? Because that's something you just don't do in America or in Europe. But boy, do they like to talk about God in Africa. Man, I've been in Nigeria, I went to Ethiopia, I was in Kenya, 3 different countries over a period of the last 2 months, and it's amazing. They are so eager to talk about God. Now, they have no other choice because for them, it's a matter of life and death. We have that luxury to either bring it up or not. When I was there at Speaker's Corner, I noticed that the guys that were there, and the girls too, but mostly fellows, They were always on the attack. They were always polemical. Now, the word polemics is the opposite of apologetics, so I'll just define terms. Apologetics is defense. Like your football team, you have two different teams, right? A defensive team and an offense. Well, in Christianity, apologetics is defense, and that means whenever someone's attacking us or throwing questions at us or in taking on the person of Jesus Christ, or they have a problem with our authority of our Scripture, the Pauline paradigm, the cultural mandate, all of these different attacks that we're getting, and they're amazing how many of them they have. We have to defend ourselves, and we do a pretty good job of teaching people how to defend ourselves, because that's the only thing you'll find in our Bible schools or in our seminaries. The problem is the best defense is a good offense. You know that in your football team, you need to have a good offense because they are the ones that win the game. They are the ones that score the touchdown. They are the ones that are best known. They are the ones that have the best salaries. Why? Because they are the ones who go and force the others to go on defense. And so when you have a good offense, you're going to win the game. Where is our offense in Christianity? There's the problem. Where is there any school teaching offense? So what's the word? Polemics is the offense. If you look in the dictionary, polemics just means war with word, to go to war with word, to go on the offense, to attack with words, not with weapons of this world, as Paul says. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 10. I mean, it's all right there in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. When I'm with you, I am timid, but when I am away, I am bold. We do just the opposite. Have you noticed? When we're in the church, we're bold as ever. And we're praising the Lord, and we're all over the place, dancing in the streets, dancing in the aisles, but we never do that outside. That boldness we only keep in church, in private, where no one's going to be offended. Once we get outside, we're as timid as ever. And we never talk about God, and we never dance in the streets. And we're never passionate like we are when we're singing and praising the Lord's name in church. Paul says just the opposite. I'm timid when I'm with you, but I am bold when I'm away. For we do not use weapons of this world, he says. What does that mean? Well, we don't use the sword. We don't use knives. We don't use bombs, bullets, and cruise missiles. That would be the application for today. We don't use weapons of this world. We use divine power. Divine power. What is he talking about? We go into battle with a completely new set of weapons, and it's called prayer. And it's called letting the Holy Spirit go ahead of us, prepare the ground for us, infill us with the Spirit so we know what to say. The Lord said He's going to give us the words to do so. We use divine power, and then verse 5, we use arguments. Why don't we read verse 5? We use arguments and take captive every thought and make it obedient to Jesus Christ. That's Paul. And look what Paul did. Everywhere he went, he used arguments. That's why God chose him. He had already chosen 12. He needed a 13th disciple. Why? He needed someone like Paul. He needed someone who was an academic. He needed someone who was a communicator. He needed someone who could go toe-to-toe with the Epicureans and the Stoics and the Jews and the rabbis. Yes, because he had been a rabbi. He needed somebody who knew his scriptures, like Paul knew his scriptures. He needed somebody who would go from city to city to city, in Laodicea and Cappadocia and Berea, there in Ephesus. Every city he went to, he went immediately right into the synagogue. Uninvited folks. That's not friendship evangelism. That's what we've been told. You've got to make friends first. You've got to earn the right to preach the gospel. Where does it say that in the New Testament? Where did Paul ever earn the right to preach the gospel? Never do I see that happening. But what did he do? He went right into the synagogue. Went right up to the Pharisee. He probably didn't even know the name of that Pharisee, and he certainly didn't take him out to tea. And what did he do? He confronted him with what he had done to the Messiah. Synagogue after synagogue after synagogue, and they got fed up, and they had him thrown into prison. He got beaten up. Twice they tried to stone him to death. He caused the riot in Ephesus, and they finally killed him in Rome. Folks, you don't get beaten up, you don't cause riots, and you don't get killed for just friendship evangelism. So why aren't we more like Paul? Well, that's exactly what I'm asking. If it was good enough in the first century, it should be good enough in the 21st century, don't you think? So in order to be like Paul, why don't we act like Paul? Why don't we start being like our good Muslim friends? Notice the Muslims love to hammer us. Every time we say that we believe in Jesus Christ, boy, they have question after question after question. Do you ever see them being timid or shy when we talk about God or about Jesus Christ or about that God entered time and space? Once you say that, you're confronting a Muslim. Once you say that God died on the cross, you're confronting a Muslim. The gospel, by definition, is highly confrontational, folks, to any Muslim. You all know what I'm saying. I can see you're shaking your head. You agree with me. You know this is true. Muslims, more than anybody else, by definition, the gospel is confrontational. And if we aren't talking about the gospel, if we aren't bringing it into our conversations, if we're not going to get to Jesus Christ in our gospel presentation or in our relationships, then we're just wasting time. The problem is we don't teach this in our schools. I don't know of any. I've been at 6 seminaries, and there's not one seminary where I heard that kind of a message before. We just don't teach this because we are so fearful of what's going to happen to us. There is a pervasive fear here in America about Islam. And it's not just here, it's all over Europe as well. Not so much in Africa, as I'm finding. God bless the Africans. They really know how to take it on. And I wish we had hundreds more like them. But here's what I'm going to do, and this is what I found out. At Speaker's Corner, I noticed that we were always on the defensive, but no one was going on the offense, and people were coming and watching this, and they found that we were always defending. They walk away thinking that Christianity had all the problems. No one had dared say anything about Islam because we didn't know how to. There was not much there. Oh, there were some things about. We could talk about Muhammad's sexual proclivities, but that just caused an awful lot of anger, and that's called hate speech. And that's really, I could see why Muslims call that hate speech. And they've got a word, finally they got a word for it called Islamophobia. So if you attack Muhammad's sexual proclivities, you attack his violence, you're Islamophobic. And most people will say, yes, that is Islamophobic, because all you're doing is mocking Muhammad. Whether we like it or not, for most people, even secular people, they see that as a problem. And so that's why I found that after about 25 years of doing that, I just stopped doing that because I was realizing all I was doing is causing an awful lot of anger. More than that, I wasn't getting many converts. People were not coming through. Then I was introduced to this man here, Dr. Gerald Hotting. Dr. Gerald Hotting, there at School of Oriental and African Studies in the University of London. I'd already had 2 master's degrees, one in apologetics, not polemics, just apologetics, and not Islamic apologetics, just regular apologetics, looking at all these different arguments, mainly against atheists, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the moral argument, all these great arguments, but they were all aimed towards the humanist world and the secular world, nothing against Islam, nothing over here. And here I was, and I'd already had another master's degree from Fuller Seminary on Islam from Dr. Dudley Woodbury. But that was all ironical. It was what we call the ironic approach, which is friendship evangelism, the peace, losing peace and reconciliation, loving your Muslim into the kingdom, which is fine, nothing wrong with that. The difficulty is we're not getting many Muslim converts. And the type of converts we tend to get by using just love are people who need to be loved. But they're not the Sauls who become Pauls. They're not the people who can go into their own community and confront like Saul was able to do when he became Paul. So I was there listening to this guy, Dr. Gerald Hotting, and he had a class of about 50 students there at the School of Oriental and African Studies on the origins of Islam. I said, well, this should be interesting. I thought I knew everything about the origins of Islam because haven't you all read the stories on how Islam began? Have you read the story about Muhammad? Born in 570. Living in a place called Mecca, started receiving revelations in 610 in a cave called the Hira Cave. And from 610 to 622, he continued to receive these revelations for 12 years. And then he moved then to Medina and continued for another 10 years to receive those revelations. And that's the Quran that we have in our hand today. What's different? That's simple. Everybody's heard that story. That's all the story you ever heard. And it's the only story that's ever taught. Dr. Hotting was saying, well, we can't find any reference to Muhammad in the 7th century. I said, what? No reference to a man named Muhammad in the 7th century. Oh, there are lots of Muhammads there, or lots of Muhammads there, or if you want to call them. And he gave 5 different references to a man named Muhammad, but he was in the wrong place. He was in Gaza. He was in Damascus. He was up in Tikrit in what is today, well, Gaza, as you know, is all over the news. That's in Palestine. Then you have Damascus is in Syria, and Tikrit's in Iraq. That's way up in the north. I don't recall Muhammad ever being up there. What's more, he never called himself a Muslim. That name didn't exist, he said. That word we can't find anywhere. There is nobody called Muslims in the 7th century at all. I said, whoa, this is new. I hadn't heard this before. And then he said the first time we hear anything about Muhammad, the first time we see a biography about Muhammad is actually from 833. I said, 833? That's 200 years later. It takes him 200 years to finally write down his story. And the first time we hear anything that Muhammad said, called the hadith, doesn't come till 240 years later in 870. And 875 and 915. That's the late 9th century and the early 10th century for something that someone was saying in the 7th century. I'd never heard this before. And then when you look at all the mosques that are there, all around Arabia, none of them are facing Mecca. All the Qiblas are facing much further north, possibly Jerusalem, he said. Now, as this was happening, I was looking at these Muslims who were in the class. There was about 20 Muslims, 25 Muslims, as I found out. And they were listening to the same thing I was listening to, and they were getting upset, and they were getting angry. But rather than retort or respond to him, they just stood up and went to the door, slammed the door, yelled something at him as they were leaving, and never came back. And within 2 weeks, we had lost all of our Muslims. All of them, yelling things at him. And I said, whoa, this is amazing. They don't know how to respond to this. I've never come across this material, neither had they. Said, I want to learn more. But of course, Dr. Hotting was seeing what was happening. And if you know anything about academics, you get paid by how many students you have. And if the students start leaving, there goes your salary. So he started toning down his rhetoric, and he started not coming to any conclusions. I was raising my hand, say, hold on a minute, no Qibla is facing Mecca? What about the Dome of the Rock? He says, yeah, that's interesting. There is no Qibla on the Dome of the Rock. No Qibla on the Dome of the Rock, the third most holy shrine, it has no Qibla. I said, what's the meaning of that? He said, I don't know. I have no idea. I said, wait a minute, you must have an idea. He did not want to come to any conclusions because he was losing so many students. And so this is the problem for academics. They dare not come to conclusions. And if they do come to conclusions, they dare not say them openly, because in doing so, they're going to lose not only their position, they're probably going to lose their chair, and they may lose their life. This is the only area of study I know where you can lose your life for what you find. No other study has this problem. And I could see it right there in this is 1995. Well, I wanted to take this stuff down to Speaker's Corner. I wanted to try it out there. Man, did I get beat up. I got my glasses broken. I got knocked off the ladder. It was no fun. Somebody filmed this while I was there. I don't know who it was, but you know these old big VHS videos that you used to have, these boxes that you used to put in that machine? And they had filmed this, and they were selling it at a store, and one of the students in our class bought it and brought it to Dr. Hotting, and he called me into his office. He was livid. He was angry. He said, what do you think you're doing? I said, what do you mean, what am I doing? How are you taking this down to Speaker's Corner and being filmed, putting this stuff there out in public? I said, well, isn't that what you want me to do? He says, absolutely not. He says, this will kill me if they know I'm saying this. He says, you are not to ever use this material. I said, well, hold on a minute. I said, once you teach it, it's no longer yours, it's now mine. I paid for this. This is not your material anymore. Therefore, I can use whatever you teach. And more than that, I'm doing you a service because I'm the one getting beaten up, not you. I'm not even mentioning your name because you're not the one who did the research. I'm mentioning the Germans who did the research. All you're doing is quoting what they did. He had no recourse. He had to let me do it. There was nothing he could do. And I said, this is amazing. If people are getting beat up for this, if they have no recourse. So finally, they had me, a number of students came up to me, Muslim students. They said, listen, there's a guy coming through town. His name is Dr. Jamal Badawi. He is coming back from Malaysia, going back to Halifax, where he is a professor. He had done 300 videos on the Quran. So he was the world's leading authority at that time in the English-speaking world on the Quran. Would you be willing to debate him? Well, I'd never done a debate before in my life. And I said, well, let's try it. Let's go. So we went there in 1995, in August of 1995. And I debated this guy right here, Dr. Jamal Badawi. And we went, and basically it was a debate on whether or not the Quran was the Word of God. Something as innocent as that. And the week before the debate, I got up to Cambridge University to talk to a woman doctor, Dr. Patricia Corona. Do any of you know who Dr. Patricia Corona is? Fred, you know who she is. Amazing woman. Did you ever meet her when she was alive? I went to her office. Dr. Patricia Corona reads and writes 15 languages. She's from Denmark. These are all archaic languages, not modern languages. And these are Akkadian, Nabatean Aramaic, Syro-Aramaic. These are languages that no longer are used, but were used back in the 7th century. So she could read the original documents, and she had gone through, and she had been had finished her doctorate there at SOAS, and then she had moved to Oxford University, where she was head of department there in the Middle Eastern department. And she wrote a book called Hagerism in 1977, which started to put out a possibility of what really happened, what really took place. And she made a mistake of really trying to come up with a conclusion. You never do that. Don't ever do that. Don't ever try to find out who Muhammad is. Just stay away from that. And she found to her chagrin that she has been vilified ever since because of that book. But she wrote another book in 1987 called Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam, probably the most devastating book out there that just shut down Mecca. And we're going to get into some of her material next. Now this material, all she did was go back to the original documents and find out what they said and saw what they were talking about this place called Mecca, which didn't exist. There was no reference in anything. Because of that, she had death threats. She had to leave Oxford University, move to Cambridge University, and that's where she was when I met her in 1995. And I was in her office for about 3 hours as we went through and planned this debate. Don't say this, try to say that, here's a better way to say it, have you thought of this? And that, after about 3 hours, I turned to her, I said, this is all your material. Why aren't you doing this debate? This is really your debate, not mine. And she started laughing. She says, you know, Jay, let me tell you something. I have a chair to protect. I have an institution to represent. I don't dare say this in public. I can write it in a book, and they get peer-reviewed years later in articles or in other books. But nowhere am I going to ever do a debate on this subject. She says, you, however, you have no chair to protect. And the only thing, or the only person you represent is called Jesus Christ. And the penny dropped for me. She could not do this debate, but I could. They cannot do this debate, but you can. This material that I'm going to introduce, much of it comes from her and other people since. But she got it from the Germans. Everybody's getting it from the Germans. The problem is she can go much faster than them because she can read the languages they can't. And that's why she is devastating. At the end of that debate, Dr. Jamal Badawi turned to me and I gave 10 historical challenges. And he says, listen, Jay, everything you're arguing from is based on silence. There is just nothing there for Muhammad. There's nothing there for the Quran, and there's nothing there for Mecca. You're right. It's just based on silence. But the absence of evidence does not prove the evidence of absence, which is true. And he hung me on that. The absence of evidence does not prove the evidence of absence. He said, at some point, we're going to find the evidence. I said, well, it's been 1,400 years. You still haven't found it. How much longer do we have to wait? I can't wait another 1,400 years. Where is it? Now, that was 1995. What I'm going to show you now, what we're going to go through now, shows that we have all the evidence in the world. And in fact, the whole debate has now flipped 180 degrees. They are now arguing from silence, no longer us. You're going to see why, and we're going to go through it very quickly, so I just want you to look at the screen as we go through it. So that happened in 1995. In 1997, because we were getting so much anger from the Muslims, some of the Christians were getting quite upset. Colin Chapman, who is the head of the Islamic material for the Anglican Church, came to me, and he was quite upset at what I was doing at Speaker's Corner. And he says we needed to have a debate, but an internal debate, well, only with Christians. So he invited about 50 scholars. 25 of them had chairs in different universities, and the other 25 were missionaries who were doing doctoral thesis research. And so we brought them together at Selly Oaks College in Birmingham University in Britain. And I debated this fellow right here, Dr. David Marshall. Dr. David Marshall had his doctorate from Oxford University on the Quran. And the debate was on two subjects. First of all, should we use polemics with Muslims? And secondly, should we employ historical criticism, both of which I said yes to. So I was arguing for the affirmative, he was arguing for the negation. After 2 hours of going back and forth on this, we then had a show of hands. 25 went with him and 25 went with me. Who do you think went with him? The academics or the missionaries? And who do you think went with me? Who went with him? And who went with me? Exactly. That's where the penny dropped for me. Now, I couldn't understand it. I thought for sure, because everything I was using was academic, was all material from other academics. I was just using academic material. You would think the academics wanted it. And this is where Dr. Peter Riddell, who was in the car with me driving back home from Birmingham that night, he said, Jay, let me explain it to you. And he almost said the exact same thing that Patricia Crone had said 2 years earlier. Those of us in academia, because he had to argue, he actually voted for Dr. Marshall as well. He said, those of us in academia, we can't do this. We cannot use polemics because we have other Muslims on staff with us. And if we brought polemics, it would be so much division within the faculty that I would lose my tenure. Don't ask us to do this, but you can. Don't ever give up, Jay. Well, he became my supervisor for my doctorate because of that. Because I realized here's a man I could work with. Because here's an academic from Melbourne School of Theology who had he had 10 students under him, all doing doctorates. And I decided, let me work with this guy because he understood what we were doing. And he gave me the freedom to go ahead and confront Islam at its very roots. So that was in 1997, 1998. Now, there are 3 forms of polemics that we're now moving into. And these are the 3 areas that I have used, all of which, the first one is what we call internal polemics. Internal polemics starts from the premise that you take the Quran, you take the Bible, and you take the Quran and you just open it up. You open up the Quran and you read the words that are there. You read the verses that are there, and then you confront what you're reading. You look at Muhammad, you look at his life, and you just confront who he is, what he did, what he said. That's internal polemics. And that's what all of us have been taught to do, those of us who have learned polemics. That's really the only polemics that most people are doing. This is what David Wood does. This is what Hatun Tash does. This is what Sam Shamoon. There's a little bit of controversy going on with Sam and David right now, but this is what they have been doing for their whole careers. That's called internal polemics. And that's what's all over the internet. Now, that kind of polemics you can only use on the internet. You can't use it face-to-face with people, especially if you're in Nigeria. When I'm in Nigeria, they can't use this anymore. That's much too dangerous. If you start confronting Muhammad or confronting the Quran, you're going to die. They're going to kill you. So therefore, that they can't use anymore. And that's what I'm getting everywhere I go. I was just in Ogbomoso, which is the largest seminary in Nigeria, just 3 weeks ago, just outside of Ilorin, up in the northwest. And I came there just to talk to a few students on apologetics class. As soon as the students heard that I was on campus, the place got crowded out with other students who had watched me on videos on YouTube. And pretty soon we had to move to the chapel. That got filled up, so then we had to move to the assembly, and they just stopped all classes. And for 2 days, I had these students to share with the material I'm going to share with you this morning. But 2 days I had given to them. So we had lots of time to look at it. Over 1,000 students watched this material. And this is they said we can't use anymore because it's just too dangerous. The other one is what we call cultural polemics. Cultural polemics, really this is the Christian's favorite. This is the one that a lot of us do. In fact, I'm using this right now. I just went and put 2 videos up on Nigeria and what's happening just the last few days. I've just put one on the killings that are happening there. And I interviewed one of the fellows who's been up to the killings, who's seen the villages and talked to some of the people who've survived. And almost all the students that I was working with there in Nigeria, every one of them had someone in their family who has either been killed or kidnapped or beheaded or raped. Every student was wounded within their family. I couldn't believe it. And no one's talking about it here. Well, Trump's finally said something about a week or 2 ago. But other than him, no one's mentioned this openly. Talk about the genocide that's going on in Nigeria. Why is no one talking about it? So I put this video up about a week ago. That's called cultural polemics. And then I put another one up about the Sharia law that they have now introduced into the Constitution there in Nigeria in 1999. And the Christians didn't even know what was happening. So now they're getting all the churches to go and try to shut out and throw out those Sharia laws that are in the institution. I was at the National Assembly meeting with some of the senators. They wanted to talk to me. And they're now going to all the churches around the South, because that's where all the Christians are in the South, to get them to rise up and to put signatures up just to get the Sharia law out of the Constitution. So that's called cultural polemics, looking at the culture, looking and see what Islam is doing culturally and confronting it head on. But the material that I like to use is what the third area, and this is the most recent kind of polemics, and it's called external polemics. This is the one that people do not like. Christians don't like this one. We're finding, I didn't realize this, but I'm finding to my detriment that a lot of Christians don't like this one. And this is basically just historical criticism. Looking and applying what was applied against us in the 1800s and the 1900s and applying it to Islam. So I'm going to be using redacted criticism today. I'll be using source criticism. I'll be doing some form criticism and a lot of textual criticism. These are the same criticisms that were matured on Christianity and our scriptures that I'm now going to apply to Islam. And we should apply to every religion. Why? Because Christianity has had the test and we've passed the test. It decimated our church 100 years ago, back in 1905. The churches were decimated in Europe, along with Darwinianism and historical criticism. The church was just destroyed. And today, only about 5% go to church in Europe now. In Britain, it's about 7%. That's it. And if you come to Britain or you come to Europe, you will see we are a small, small minority. Now, people will still call themselves Christians, but they don't go to church. And most don't even know who Jesus is, let alone any of the biblical stories. It's just a name only. So historical criticism has been huge with Christianity. Now, anybody that makes a historical claim, any religion that makes a historical claim, and there's 4 claims. A person who does a certain thing at a certain time in a certain place. Those are the 4 areas that we investigate. So somebody who does a certain thing at a certain place and in a certain time. That's all we're asking. And historical criticism hit those 4 areas. And every religion talks about people who live in history who do a certain thing at a certain place. Do they not? At a certain time. So therefore, they have to be investigated in all 4 areas. And Christianity has. Islam is just now beginning to do it. And this is what we're going to do today. So let's look at the historical critique. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to confront one book, one man, and one place. The place is Mecca, the man is Muhammad, and of course, the book is the Quran. These are the 3 things we're going to confront. This form of polemics confronts the very foundations of Islam without confronting the people or their revelation or the prophet and lowers the anger. I don't get death threats anymore. I used to get death threats all the time when I was using the first 2 criticisms. Anytime you confront, especially when you touch Muhammad, if you say anything about Muhammad publicly, you're going to get death threats. Stay away from Muhammad. He's a waste of time for me. I wish I would not like to do anything with Muhammad as far as I'm concerned. And why in the world are we wasting our time on a person who never existed? Do you see what I'm saying? Why waste time on someone who never existed? Let's stick to that, because then you don't get death threats. And more, you completely shut down everything they believe. Now, why the external critique? Why am I doing it? Well, everything we're going to use is based on evidence. I'm going to only look at 7th and 8th century evidence. So I'm going to be looking at coins, I'm going to be looking at inscriptions, I'm going to be looking at maps, timelines, manuscripts. We're going to do all that today, all right? So we are no longer arguing from silence. They now are arguing from silence because there's nothing they have from the 7th and 8th century to support what they're doing, especially the 7th century, where everything takes place. Everything happens in the 7th century. Muhammad starts receiving his revelation in 610 in a place called Mecca, and then dies in 632 in a place called Medina. And by that time, all 114 surahs, every one of those 114 surahs was complete. Exactly like the book I have in my hand today, well, in my bag over there. It confronts the very foundations of Islam. Why? Because without the book and the man, there is no Islam. You have to have that book, you have to have that man, and you have to have that place. You take away one of those 3 and the other 2 collapse. All right? It's neutral. Anybody can use this. And I'm finding everybody wants to use it, especially the atheists love it. The humanists love it. And it's seen as politically correct, because you're going to find there's nothing I'm going to say today that's politically incorrect. You're going to find that there's no hate speech on anything I'm going to say in the next 3 hours, and there's nothing Islamophobic about what we're going to do. So it's absolutely important that everybody does. But more than that, it's so easy to communicate. You're just going to look at the screen. You can see everything is visual. And once you get the PowerPoints, you can use it as well. We're going to give you the PowerPoints. You can have the PowerPoints, all right? But here's the great thing. I don't want the humanists, and I do not want the atheists to use it, because they have no alternative to replace it with. You take away the book, what book are they going to give? You take away the man, who are they going to give as a replacement? And as far as the place, what place are they talking about? They have nothing as an alternative. They have nowhere to go through. And that's why they're just going to bring them to nihilism. And I don't care about nihilism. I want to bring them home. I want to bring them home to a better place, a better book, and a better man. So, And we're finding hundreds who are coming to Christ. I did a debate in 2014 on the Quran itself with Dr. Shabir Ali, and I just talked about the 6 major manuscripts, the earliest manuscripts. He had no response to it. I only did it in front of 700 people. Over 1 million people have watched that debate, and we know of over 100 men and women who have given their lives to Jesus Christ just because of that one debate. That's how effective this is. So this kind of material does shut down Muslims. It shuts them down because they have always had these niggling beliefs that maybe there is a problem with the Quran, maybe there is a problem with Mecca, and maybe there is a problem with Muhammad. So we're just kind of showing them exactly where that problem is. Now let's start with their own claims. And we call it the standard Islamic narrative because Dr. Yasir Qadhi was the one that coined it back in 2020 when he was asked this. He said, your standard narrative has holes in it, pointing to Muhammad hijab. Your standard narrative, you Muslims, your standard narrative has holes in it. What standard narrative? Standard Islamic narrative. I love that. Standard Islamic narrative, S-I-N. Sin has holes in it, and I agree. And so the more holes we can find in sin, the better and easier our job is. So let's look at the standard Islamic narrative, and let's look at their traditional claims. They claim that Muhammad was the last and the greatest prophet, was born in Mecca in 570 and died in Medina in 632, that he is the model for Islam as the paradigm for the world. He received the Quran as the final revelation. The Quran, his revelation, was sent down only to him between 610 and 632. Therefore, it is the greatest, the only perfectly preserved, and the final revelation, and it corrects all previous revelations. But therefore, Islam is the final religion based on Muhammad's life and sayings, that's called the Sunnah, and on the Quran's teaching. Now, conclusion. Therefore, Islam is dependent on 3 things. 1 book, 1 man, and 1 place. The book is the Quran, the man is Muhammad, and the place is Mecca. Those are my words for it, the book, the man, and the place. Here's the interesting. These 3 areas are foundational. Therefore, let's investigate all 3 of them, but let's do it from the 7th century. Not what Muslims are saying today. I don't care diddly about what they're saying today. I want to know what happened at the very beginning. Isn't that what we should do for any religious claim or any historical claim? In this case, both religious and historical. Let's go back to the 7th century, and let's go back to the place where all this happened. Let's go back to the Hijaz, that central part of Arabia, in western Arabia, where you find Mecca and Medina. Let's go back to those 2 areas. But we're not going to start with the book of the man and the place, though that sounds great. We're going to go the other way around. We're going to start with the place, the man, and the book. We're going to go backwards. Why? Well, you'll see. Let's get into it and you'll see why. Historically, Mecca is important because it still exists today. Therefore, you can still investigate it. The Quran is also important because it still exists today. Therefore, you can investigate it. Muhammad, however, no longer exists today. So how can you investigate him? He can be whatever you want him to be. And what I'm finding is that's what Christians are doing. They're creating Muhammads everywhere they find it, without realizing you have to have the man who lived in a place called Mecca and received a book called the Quran in order to find the Muhammad of Islam. It's just like the whole problem with Jesus. In the 1800s, they said, did Jesus ever existed? And of course, there were lots of Jesuses in the 1st century. Anybody can find Jesus. It was a common name. But we're not looking at any Jesus. We're looking at one Jesus. One Jesus who was born in Bethlehem, grew up in Nazareth, and died in Jerusalem. That's the Jesus we're looking for. And when he died, he rose again. That's the Jesus I want. I don't want just any Jesus. I want that Jesus. The same token must be for Muhammad. I don't care what Muhammad you find. You can find lots of Muhammads. But the Muhammad we're looking for, the Muhammad the Muslims follow, the Muhammad who is the model for all of mankind, has to have been born in Mecca in 570, had to have lived there for 52 years, had to move to a place called Medina, and in that intervening time between 610 and 632, that 22-year period, he had to receive a book called the Quran and the entire book. Not a piece here, not a little bit there, not another part there. That's the Muhammad we're looking for because that's the Muhammad Muslims follow. And you take away even 1 iota of that environment. If you take 1 little bit away, okay, so he didn't receive a book called the Quran. That's not the Muhammad of Islam. No Muslim would agree with that. Okay, he didn't live in Mecca. No Muslim would agree with that. You've got to go with what Muslims claim is Muhammad's. They're Muhammad. And the same token, you've got to go with who we claim Jesus is. And we're not going to be satisfied with any other Jesus. It has to be the Jesus who died and rose again. Otherwise, we're all damned. If God, he didn't claim to be God, and he didn't die, and he didn't rise again, then what's the purpose? Who cares you find another Jesus? You have to find that Jesus, okay? I'm making that very important because this has been confusing an awful lot of Christians who says, well, just find any Muhammad and we're satisfied. No, no, no. That's not the Muhammad of Islam. So Islam is based really on three things. It's like a stool with three legs, okay? It is dependent on one book, one man, and one place. Of course, there they are there. Now, you start attacking one of those legs. And let's start with Mecca. We're going to start with Mecca first. Once you start attacking Mecca, the other two begin to wobble. Once you destroy Mecca, then you destroy the other two. The other two cannot stand by themselves. They absolutely need Mecca. Therefore, that's the reason then that there is no Islamic Muhammad. I don't care what Muhammad. If you find any other Muhammad, if he doesn't come from Mecca, he's no longer the Muhammad of Islam. I don't care what Quran you find. If it's not from Mecca, it doesn't matter what Quran you find. You're going to find lots of Qurans. In fact, we're going to show you that there's lots of Qurans that predate Islam, but they're not Quranic. You have no idea what I'm talking about. You'll see in about another 2 hours. So let's begin by looking at what Muslims claim for Mecca. And we'll start with Mecca. It's foundational for everything. And what they claim is this, that it's the oldest city in history. Why? Because in the Quran itself, in chapter 7, verse 24, when Adam and Eve have eaten of that fruit that they weren't supposed to eat, they were then condemned for it, and then they were pardoned for their sin, and then they were thrown down to earth. So therefore, the Garden of Eden is up in space. Did you know that? In the Quran, the Garden of Eden is up in space. It's not on earth. And they got thrown down to earth. Now, the traditions explain where they were thrown to. According to Al-Bukhari, Eve was thrown down to Mecca, and Adam was thrown down to what is today Sri Lanka. Don't worry, he was 90 feet tall. He stood back up, and he started boom, 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 and walked up to Mecca and joined his wife. But what does that tell you? If that is the case, if this is where Adam and Eve were, then I would suggest this is the oldest city in history. Because there's no other city earlier than Adam and Eve. You can't have anybody, there's no one else earlier than Adam and Eve. You can't have a city until people live there. Am I correct? Just say yes to everything I say, all right? So that would suggest to me it's the oldest city in history. Number two, it's where Abraham was living in chapter 21 of the Quran. In chapter 51 to 71, he goes into the Masjid al-Haram. So what is the Masjid al-Haram? Who speaks Arabic here? Okay, what does Masjid al-Haram mean? The forbidden place of bowing. Yes. Just say yes to me. Okay. So it means he's going to be my Arab expert, and he's just going to say yes to everything I say. Thank you, sir. So the forbidden place of bowing is what Masjid al-Haram means. That could be anywhere. It's not called Mecca. Isn't that interesting? But Muslims have claimed that that's Mecca because that's the Kaaba, the Masjid al-Haram, the forbidden place of bowing. As we can find, there's lots of Kaabas, and then could be almost anywhere. Nonetheless, we'll go with what the Muslims say. So if that's the case, that means that Mecca had to exist in 1900 BC, because that's when Abraham was living. Are you following me there? Yep. According to chapter 19. Also, it's the center of trade, according to the traditions, the standard Islamic narrative, north, south, east, and west. So therefore, it was the center of the world. Therefore, it should be well documented, and people should know about it if it's that famous and that popular. Now, in the Quran, it doesn't say Mecca except for one place. There's only one place in chapter 48, verse 24. That's it. Except for chapter 48, verse 24, there is no reference to Mecca. However, it does talk about the place where the Prophet lived. It talks about the center of history. It talks about the first sanctuary is in Mecca. Now, therefore, Muslims say that must be Mecca. But as an Arab speaker, you know that there are three consonants in every word. So the three consonants in Mecca is not the same as Mecca, is it? One is ba-kaka, and the other one is ma-kaka. Three completely different, not complete, but therefore a completely different name. And we know where Mecca is. Those of us who know our Jews roots know that Mecca is from the Mecca Valley. We also know that all the pilgrims coming to Jerusalem always stayed in the quarter of Mecca. Mecca is outside, it's in one of the quarters outside of Jerusalem where they would stay and get washed up before they went as pilgrims to go in and do the sacrifices the next day up at the temple. So Mecca is well known in the Bible. And therefore, the first sanctuary appointed to mankind was at Mecca. That means the place where the pilgrims went before they went to the sanctuary up in Jerusalem. It's also the mother of all settlements in chapter 6 and also chapter 42. Not Mecca, the Masjid al-Haram. Adam and Eve were cast down there in chapter 7, verse 24. Though it doesn't say Mecca, just cast down to earth. Abraham lived there in 900 BC according to chapter 21. Muhammad was born there and lived there until 622 according to the traditions. And the Mecca became the center of the Qibla in 624 according to chapter 2 verse 149. Now it doesn't say Mecca, it says Masjid al-Haram again. But Muslims claim that is Mecca. So the above imply that people have lived there from the very beginning. When you get to the traditions, when you look at that, you notice that there's lots of references to Mecca. Why? Well, the traditions are written much later. As I said, they start to be written in the 9th century and in the 10th century. As we're going to find out, they're not even written in the 9th and 10th century, but hold on, it's way before we get to that. So when you look at there, you will find that when the traditions talk about this place, and they do call it Mecca by then, in the 9th century, they say that it's in a valley with a parallel valley. Ibn Hisham, Al-Bukhari all say that. That the Safa and Marwa have shrines to idols atop them, and before Islam, that's in Ibn Hisham. It has streams, it has fields, it has trees, grass, fruit, clay, loam, grapes, grain, pomegranates. It has olive trees. All of this is there in Mecca according to the tradition. But take a look at these pictures here. Do they look like a lot of vegetation there? Absolutely no vegetation there. In fact, according to soil samplers, there has not been any nutrients in the ground for over 3,000 years. Not 2,000, 3,000 years. There's nothing there. It's nothing more than a desert. There's not even any aquifers there. So that's the problem. So Mecca is not in a valley. It and its nearest mountain are 2 miles away. It has none of these vegetations listed above because it's in a desert. So it's too arid and dry to support any of the above, according to modern soil studies. Conclusion? In the Quran, Mecca is referred to as the place of the Prophet, but in the 9th and 10th century traditions, the Mecca they portray suggests the authors lived much further north. Hold on to that. We'll be coming back to that. Notice where the Quran positions its narrative. If you look at, there are 65 geographical locations in the Quran itself, but only 9 places are named. 23 times it mentions that this prophet goes up to the people of Ad every day, and he has relationship with these people in Ad. But here's Mecca down here. If he's living in Mecca, how did he get up there and back in one day? That's 600 miles up, 600 miles back. 24 times it says that he has relationship with people in Thabit. And he's going up there and trading with them. From here down to there in one day, 1,200 miles. 7 times he's talking with the people here in Midian. That's 500 miles. That's 1,000 miles up and there and back. You can't go 12,000 miles and 1,200 miles in just one day. Not by camel. Helicopter, yes. Airplane, certainly. But there were no helicopters and airplanes, not in the 7th century. So you can see, even the traditions even the Quran itself is having problems. So it's suggesting that whoever this prophet is, receiving this Quran and having this relation with these 3 peoples, the Ad is the biblical Uz, Thamud are the Nabateans, and the Midians are the Midianites that we see in the Bible. So these are all well-known people. They're all through our Bible. We know who they are. We know where they live. And none of them live down here. Why? Because it's a desert. What's more, when you look at the traditions, they talk about these different prophets who were buried there. Adam and Eve, Seth, Ishmael, Noah, Hud, the great-grandson of Noah, Salih, the grandfather of Hagar, the queen of Sheba, Daniel. Between 70 and 300 prophets are buried in Mecca. And when you're buried within 24 hours, according to Islam. So if that's the case, you need to start looking for their bodies. What was interesting is all these prophets are buried in a kneeling position, in a prayerful position, because they continue to pray even after they die. If that's the case, they should be easy to find, shouldn't they? Now, if you look at Mecca today, you will see that there's an awful lot of buildings going on. This is the 4th highest tower in the world. And you can see all the cranes. Look at all the cranes that they're building. They're building huge skyscrapers all around the Kaaba. And there you can see all these ultra-luxe apartments for people doing the Hajj who are very wealthy. If you look here, that is Khadija's house right there. They've destroyed Khadija's house to build these hotels. That is where Muhammad was born, right there. They destroyed Muhammad's home. You would think that they would hold on to those places. Where Muhammad was born, where Khadija lived, the wife of Muhammad? No, they're destroying them all. Now, when you build large buildings like that, you have to dig deep. Why? For the foundations. And when you dig deep in old places, especially the oldest place on earth, who shows up? The archaeologists show up. And the archaeologists start licking their lips, because as you're digging and pulling out all this sand, you start to pull out lots of artifacts. And as you pull out the artifacts, the archaeologists look at the artifacts and they recreate the history of the city by looking at the artifacts. You would think, right? So Dan Gibson, a friend of mine, went to a archaeologist conference in Dubai a number of years ago, and he sat at the table with the Saudi Arabians, and he said, "What have you found with all these diggings and all this these cranes that are and these poundings that are getting down into the sand? You must be finding all kinds of artifacts." And they wouldn't answer at first. He said, "Sir, what is the oldest thing you have found there?" And they were kind of excited. They said, "Well, the oldest thing we have found so far are the ruins of an Ottoman fort." Ottomans didn't exist till 1299 AD. That's the late 13th century, going into the 14th century. AD, not BC. That's the oldest things they have been able to find. So where are all these bodies of all these praying prophets? Not one. Notice, if the above were true, this would mean that almost all of the Bible would have to now be rewritten and all the stories be redirected 600 to 1,000 miles further south. Yet there is so much evidence for biblical narrative historically, yet almost nothing for Islam's. So when was Mecca, the city itself, ever recorded? Dr. Patricia Corona, who reads and writes 15 languages, asked this in Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. She asked, where is this reference to Mecca? And the first place you could find it is the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius Continuata Byzantia Arabica, which is dated to 741. The first reference you get is 741 AD. That's over 100 years after Muhammad died. But where it's located, she didn't go far enough. If you look the second half of the Continuato Byzantia Arabica, the second half places it up in what is today's southern Turkey. That's over 1,200 miles too far north. So even that reference is in the wrong place. And it doesn't appear on any maps until 900 AD. That's the 10th century. So when you look at the maps of Ptolemy, who is from the 2nd century, these are maps that have been recreated because he didn't make any maps back in the 2nd century. They didn't use maps back then. They just used descriptions of locations. Leonard Holle from Germany put this map together looking at all his descriptions. Now you notice, if you look at the map there, Mecca's missing in that map. Here's another map that was done by Laurent Fries in the 1500s. Again, no Mecca. Here's another map that was done by Sebastian Munzer in the late 1500s, and notice there's just no Mecca. Here's a 7th century map redacted back using all the descriptions we get from all the, not just Ptolemy, but others as well, and Mecca is missing on all the descriptions. Another one, redacted back from today, going back to the 7th century, we can't find Mecca on any map. So what's going on here, folks? If it was not known, why is it no one's recorded it? Why did no one come across this place? Dan Gibson said, well, some of the other problem had to do with the Qibla. When you look at the Qibla, it should be facing all the Qiblas. That means the direction of prayer for all the mosques should be facing that city there in Mecca. Yet when he went to all these mosques, he went to over 100 mosques up until 706, and he couldn't find one Qibla from any of those mosques. All of them, you can see the Qibla wall. Many of them have been destroyed. The ruins are still there, and he would take the Qibla wall, the longest wall, and see where it's directed. And in every case, they're all directed towards this city, Petra. There in Medina, 626, China, 627, India, 629, Syria, 637, Egypt, 642, Israel, 690, Jordan, 699, Yemen, 705. Up until the 8th century, every Qibla is facing Petra. Not one Qibla is facing Mecca. The first Qibla that's facing Mecca doesn't appear till 715. Muhammad died in 632. Do you see a problem, folks? If this was canonized, according to chapter 2, verse 145 in the Quran, canonized in 621, as the Quran says, that all the Qiblas were then brought from Jerusalem back down to Mecca in 621. Then every Qibla after 621, notice all those dates are after 621. Not one of them is facing Mecca. So the archaeological evidence is also showing that there's a problem here. Now we come to what we call the trade route theory. This was introduced by Montgomery Watt because he saw that this was a difficulty back in the last century. He's from Scotland, and he said, well, the reason why there was no reference to Mecca, the reason why we can't find any place called Mecca is because of the trade problem, the problem with the trade routes. And the reason why Mecca finally became important was because of the trade route. And he says, when you look at the 5th and 6th century, you will see that the trade used to go this way. It came from China, came down through India, and I couldn't go up through the Hindu Kush and the Himalayas because that was a huge landmass. So it went this way, over to Gujarat and then from Gujarat it went across the Arabian Sea, through the Gulfs there up to Basra, and then from Basra across Iraq and across Syria over to the Mediterranean, and that's where the trade went. That was always known as the trade route that came from China and India. Until the 5th and 6th century, because these two great empires, the Sassanians and the Byzantines, started warring against each other. For the 5th and 6th up until the 7th century, that therefore shut down the trade right there, so the trade had to be redirected. And according to Montgomery Watt, it was redirected by coming across the Arabian Sea, going down to Aden, and going zip 1,250 miles right up to Gaza through Mecca. Therefore, Mecca became was now in charge of the trade. So from the 5th century on, Mecca became the center of trade, and that's why Mecca became important. Now, Dr. Patricia Corona looked at that theory, and she saw two problems. My 10-year-old son saw two problems. Let's see if any of you can see the problem with that theory. Just look at the map. Do you see at least one of the problems? What do you see? Go ahead.
Go up, I can't see what body of water that is, but...
That's the Red Sea.
Yeah.
Good man, give him a hand. That's right. My 10-year-old son saw that right away. We'll get to that.
I've listened to you.
Oh, sorry. So you already knew this.
I cheated.
All right, that's no fun. But the rest of you saw that, right? It was very self-evident, right? Please say yes. Okay, the first problem is this. She says, hold on a minute. If you're coming across the Arabian Sea and you go there to Aden, then you go up to Taif. Look where Taif is. It's up on the Western Plateau. Why would you then come down to Mecca? Can you see there you're making a detour down 3,000 feet, and then you go back up to Yathrib up there. Can you see the detour there? And then from there on up to Khaybar, Tabuk, and on up to Gaza in the north. There's a problem with that. That's the first problem, right? Now, when you look at this map, you'll see it much better. When you look at this map, you'll see this is looking from space. This is a topographical map. So let's look at the trade. This is what the trade route that we well know. So it starts in Aden, goes up to Sana'a, goes to Najran, then to Taif, then up to Yathrib, up to Tabuk, and then up to Petra, and then up to Gaza. Notice where all those places are. They're up on the Western Plateau. Can you see they're up on a plateau? And where the plateaus are, that's where the aquifers are. Underneath every one of those is an aquifer. That's why they are oases. Because there's an aquifer there, and that means you have a place for the camels to come and get fed and also get watered. Mecca, however, is not on that plateau. It's 3,000 feet off, where the red star is. Here, let's go look at this one here. This is a better map. This is a topographical map using lines. There's Aden, Sana'a, Najran, there's Taif, there's Yathrib, Tabuk, and Petra, and then Gaza. And then here's Mecca. Can you see it now? It's completely off. Mecca is down 3,000 feet without any water. It would not be a place for camels, because if you don't have any water, you don't have any food. So what are the camels going to eat or feed? They have to have something to sustain themselves. So that's the problem with Mecca. So she decided to look at all the trade routes, and of course she could read. Yeah, you go ahead.
Why couldn't we take a boat instead of going over land, right? You have the Red Sea, the trade...
We're getting to that. We're getting to that. Hold on. So she said, let's go look at the trade. Let's go look at the trade documents himself. Now remember, she can read all the documents because she reads all these languages. And she found exactly what you're saying. The documents show that the trade went across the Arabian Sea, and they stopped at Aden. Of course they'd stop at Aden because they would take off goods there and take on goods. And there they would take on some water. But from there, all the trade went through Agilis. Agilis, which is Eritrea today, and then from Agilis up the Red Sea, up over to Petra, and then from Petra to Gaza, and from Gaza, whoop, all over the Mediterranean world. So the documents showed that everything was maritime. Of course it was maritime. Why? Because you can take a ton of goods, she found, and just going 50 miles by land would cost the same amount as 1,250 miles by sea. Even today, we send everything by sea, don't we not? Because it's so much easier. If you go by land, you have to protect your trade. You have to have camels. You have to feed the camels. You have to water the camels. Anybody could be behind a rock or a sand dune or a hill, and they could attack you. Therefore, you've got to have arms to protect them. Whereas by sea, you don't have to have camels. You don't have to have food or water. What's more, you can see anybody attacking the bandits a mile away or 2 miles away, and you quickly go into a port and to protect yourself. Plus, you don't have anything. You don't have to even push the boat. The wind pushes the boat. They were all sails boats back then. So it cost nothing to go by sea then. Now, she didn't go far enough, however. Concerning the Red Sea route, she didn't look and see exactly where the trade went on the Red Sea route. And this is what we've done since then. She's no longer living, otherwise I'd call her up and say, have you looked and asked, what about the eastern seaboard? Why didn't they go up along the eastern seaboard? Because you could still go up to Jeddah, which accommodates Mecca. That Jeddah is where all the food and water comes for Mecca. So why didn't they do that there? If you look at this map here, you can see this is where the trade goes through today up the Red Sea. And that red line is where the big ships go. That's where the big channels are. The deep water channels for our large diesel, huge, you've seen them, these huge tankers that go up the Red Sea. But back in the 7th century, they didn't have huge tankers and they didn't have diesel engines. They only had sailboats. So the sailboats had to hug the coast. But what coast did they hug? Did they hug the east coast or the west coast? No. All the channels are where you see the golden arrows are. Those are the channels that they use. Notice they're hugging the African coast. Why are they hugging the African coast? Because the West African shore had water. And where there's water, there's food. Whereas the East side of this Red Sea had no water. So therefore, that's why they had to go. But we even know the names of the ports they used to go to. So we went and did some study, and you can see there are 5 ports along the West African shore of the Red Sea, the Asab in Eritrea, and we have documentation that goes back to 240 BC for it. Adulis in Eritrea that she was looking at, that's from 79 AD, that's also in Eritrea. The Sawakin from 170 AD, that's in what is today Sudan. Berenice and Safaga are in Egypt. Berenice and Safaga go back to the 3rd century BC. So there's lots of documentation for these ports. They're all on the western side of the Red Sea. And notice, every one of these ports are a 1 day's boat ride from each other. So you just go from port to port to port to port. It takes you 5 days to go up the Red Sea by wind, using wind sails. So what about the right side? What about, well, we know that Yanbu exists because there's lots of references to Yanbu, which was the port that would give water and provisions for Yathrib. Yathrib, which is today Medina. Yathrib is an ancient city. That is, we know about it. It had about 200 people living in it. What about Jeddah, however? Jeddah is what today is used to give nutrients for Mecca. So we went to Dr. Gerard Hotting. Gerard Hotting is the authority on Jeddah. And we looked at his book, and we found that he said that Jeddah did not exist until the 8th century. There was no need for Jeddah prior to the 8th century. Jeddah had to be created because Mecca was chosen in the late 7th century. Proving the reason why we even had to use Jeddah. Therefore, goodbye to Mecca and Jeddah, because they didn't exist prior to the 8th century. Without Mecca, what then happens to 7th century Islam? A big red X. It just is not there. Okay, so just looking at the trade route, we can shut it down using that way. But what about the other smaller cities? Maybe it's just because Mecca just was so small. Like all the other cities, they were too small to be noted. So Dr. Patricia Curran, who reads and writes 15 languages, decided to ask this question. So she went to all the other cities that are around, or the other hamlets that are around. And she went to Najran, she went to Sana and Taif and Yathrib and Khaybar, and she found out that Strabo, Pliny the Elder, Ptolemy, Eritrea, they all talk about these cities. So there's references to these cities that go all the way up till the 6th century. Many of them from the 3rd and 4th century BC. She went to look at Mamre, Pliny's history on it. That shows that this has been noted in the 2nd century BC. The same with Petra. Maghreb has been known since the 1st century BC. Why are all these insignificant towns referred to, but not one reference to Mecca, which is supposed to be the oldest city in history, the center of all trade? Can you see that doesn't make sense? If all these smaller insignificant towns are known of, and they're all referred to, then certainly Mecca should be referred to, not one word. So she decided to go back and look at the civilizations that surrounded Mecca. Now remember, she could read and write all their languages, so therefore she wanted to look at their documentation. Was it? No. If Mecca was the oldest city in the history of mankind, then someone somewhere in the area surrounding it should have heard of it, right? You would think. What about those empires which were far away? So she went to the Assyrian Empire, Shalmaneser or Sargon II, Sennacherib. None of them have any reference to Mecca. She went to the Babylonians. She looked at Nabonidus' documents. Nothing about Mecca. She went to the Roman Empire. She looked at Marcellinus. She looked at the Procopius. Also Pliny's history of the wars. She went to Strabo, Ptolemy, all of these, no reference to Mecca. And then she finally went to the Persian Empire, to Hira, no reference to Mecca. She said, okay, let's go to those empires that were closer. So she went to the empires like the Nabateans, no reference to Mecca. She went to the Sabaeids, no reference. To Himyarites, no reference. To the Azdeites, no reference. She went to the Kinda, which is where today Riyadh is. The Du Kahilun, no reference to Mecca. She went to the Qadarites up there in northern Arabia. Taima and Duma and Dedan are well defined and referred to, no reference to Mecca. And then finally she went to the Nubians and the Aksum, the Abyssinians across the Red Sea. No one had heard any reference. Not one of these kingdoms had heard of Mecca. Notice how close they are. And remember, Mecca is supposed to be the oldest city in history. It's where Adam and Eve went. It was the center of pilgrimage by 1900 BC. It was where Abraham rebuilt the Kaaba with Ishmael, according to chapter 21 of the Quran. So that means pilgrims were coming from all of these empires. They should have all been going to Mecca. Why has not one of them referred to it? Nowhere. Can't find any reference to it. Why do you think that's a possibility? Well, take a look at Mecca. Just look at these pictures here. What do you notice? They are bleak. They're in a desert. Soil studies inform us that the soil there has never been able to support vegetation. Why is that important? Here's why. When you look at the places, you notice it's basically in a desert. There is no vegetation. Why is that important? Well, I went down to Speaker's Corner back in 2019 and I held up these four pictures. I said, take a look at these four pictures. What do you notice? Well, these are topographical pictures looking down on Saudi Arabia from space, and you notice that they're in the middle of a desert, Mecca and Medina. Where there's a desert, there's no water. Where there's no water, there's no food. No food, no people. No people, no towns. No towns, no cities. No cities, no civilization. No civilization, no history. How long did it take me to say that? 5 seconds. No water, no food, no people, no towns, no cities. No cities, no history, no civilization. That's it. That's all you need to say. I said that from the ladder, and every time Muslims started to object, I said, oh, wait, there's no water. You've got to have water in order for people to live. You've got to have water to have food. You've got to have food to have towns with people living in them. So if there's no water, it's as simple as that. You've got to have water, folks, in order for a place that's been there since the time immemorial, since the time that Adam and Eve were there, since the time of Abraham, since all the pilgrims are going there. You've got to have water. Just like Mars, without water, there is no point in ever going there. The response to that is the Zamzam well. Mr. Smith, what about the Zamzam well? It's been there from the time immemorial. And Allah is the one that has provided. Now I'm going to show you a video, but we can't use the sound here. I'm just going to have to. This is a interview between David Chappelle and David Letterman. And David Letterman asks him, let's see if you can hear it. I don't know if you can hear it. Okay, did you get that? So Zamzam well has been since the time of Abraham. Hagar was looking for water. She can't find it. She goes to 2 different mountains, Safa and Marwa, back and forth 7 times. Finally comes back to where Ishmael is. And then suddenly water is burbling up out of the ground. And there's so much water, she says, Zamzam, Zamzam, stop, enough. So that's why it's called the Zamzam well. And it's inexhaustible. Did you get that? Mm-hmm. It is inexhaustible. It never is finished. And so Muslims say, Jay, this is an inexhaustible well. That's why everybody can use it. Now, it is at least from the time of Abraham, some say from the time of Adam and Eve. It's inexhaustible. It is furthermore the world's cleanest and purest water. It can accommodate every pilgrim who comes to Mecca and the rest of the Muslim world who would like to drink it. Thus, it is bottled and used by millions around the world. I would say billions. And if you go to any Muslim bookshop here in New Jersey, there will always be Zamzam water there. We were there in Nigeria getting our luggage out, and as the luggage was coming out, all these boxes, these rectangle boxes came one after another, 30 or 40 of them. And these were all Zamzam, liters of Zamzam water coming back from pilgrims, coming back from Mecca. And you can see them all over the world. Billions of these waters of Zamzam water, which is healing properties. What we know about the well? Well, we don't know too much. In the 1800s, that's the oldest picture we have. It's only about 30 feet wide and about 50 feet deep. You can see it was a very small well. And when you look down into it, it's not a very deep well at all. They can see someone drawing water from it. You can see by hand, every time, 1 bucket at a time. How would you supply water for all the pilgrims coming to the well, even in 1953? It was constructed, there was a building constructed over the well in 1953, and then in 1963 they decided to put the well down below, so to protect it. So it just shows a circle there. You can see the circle, that's where the well is below it. Right? You can see how close it is to the Kaaba, just about 50 feet away from the Kaaba. And that's where there's now a Zamzam well museum. Now, here's the query. Here's the problem. If it is a well that comes from Hagar discovering it, remember the story of Hagar. She's according to the Quran, according to chapter 21, she's in Mecca, or where the Masjid al-Haram is, and that's where Abraham is. Abraham throws her out of Mecca, right? And throws her out to the desert. So she must be miles away when she runs out of water. Am I correct? Miles away. She needs water for her son Ishmael. So she decides to go and find water. So she goes to one mountain called Safa, no water. She goes back to another mountain called Marwa, no water. So she goes back and forth 7 times. Isn't that interesting? 7, the perfect number. Take that under consideration. Finally, after 7 times, she comes back to where her son is, and there is the water burbling up out of out of the sand. So that tells you that it's probably miles away. So what is the Zamzam well doing only 50 feet away from the Kaaba, which is in the center of Mecca? If she had run out of water and she's still in Mecca, couldn't she just go to the nearest house and knock on the door and say, "Can I have some water?" Because there'd be hundreds of houses all around it, right? It's right smack dab in the middle of Mecca. But according to the story, she's miles away. Do you see a problem there? So obviously this can't be the original Zamzam well. It's only 21 meters away. If Abraham lived next to the Kaaba, then why was Hagar only 21 meters away if she had been cast into the desert? She should be miles away. Doesn't this suggest a rather convenient man-made well? Now, here's what's in the problem. It supplies all the needs for the Muslim world, according to the comic there, David. Yet Mecca has 2 million inhabitants, so it has to supply water for 2 million people. There are about 2 other million that come for the pilgrimage. That'd be 4 million people who come for the Hajj. Mecca needs 1,400 liters a second for its population. That's equivalent to 51 Olympic-sized pools a day. Yet the Zamzam well will only supply 19 liters a second. And that's only after it rains. So where do all the water for the 2 million Meccans and the 2 million pilgrims, plus the millions upon millions of Muslims who buy and drink it around the world? That adds up to over 1 billion drinks, not from the small dinky 30-meal Zamzam well for sure. So where does the water come from? Well, let's look at the well again. There it is. Notice the well there. Now, that's what the picture of the well looks today. I got this off of Wikipedia. You can go up and get it, although I think they've now taken it off because of my videos. They're now hiding this, so hold on to this picture. So that's what it looks like today. That's the top of the well. Notice there's pipes going into the top of the well, right? Now they even show us the pipes inside the well. So there's pictures of the pipes inside the well. There's pipes going in and there's pipes coming out. Do you see that? What are the pipes doing coming in and out? Well, just follow the pipes, for heaven's sakes. So when you follow the pipes, you notice that these pipes, they continue up and they go up to these huge holding tanks. These are all built by United Kingdom. Organization United Kingdom. These are the 11 largest tanks in the world, and they all hold this water. And in this water, they are putting perfume and sweetener to make it seem like it's nectar from heaven. So where does the water to fill these big holding tanks come from? Just follow the pipes. And the pipes go down, 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 down to Jeddah, to these desalination plants. These desalination plants, there's 27 of them to supply all of, not just Mecca's need, all of Saudi Arabia, because most of Saudi Arabia is desert. These all are made by Bechtel Corporation, Kansas City, and also Black & Veatch and Acciona from Canada and Spain. So none of this inexhaustible water that David talks about from the Zamzam well is provided by Allah itself, as all the plants come from the United States and Europe. But don't tell the Saudi Arabian government that. They know it, and the Saudi Arabians are laughing all the way to the bank. They're the ones that are saying it is inexhaustible. They're the one that is saying this is from heaven. They're the ones that say if you drink this water, you will be healed. And Allah provides it. Even David Chappelle, who is a well-known comedian, very intelligent, and yet he doesn't even understand what's going on because no one's daughter to do the work of investigating it. Now, when you go to the Hajj, you notice that they have to circumambulate this building right here. And notice that they always go counterclockwise. And notice they always go 7 times. Why do you think they go 7 times counterclockwise? Because you would think they'd go clockwise, like everybody else. But in the Hajj in Mecca, they always go counterclockwise. There's a reason. Dan Gibson thought it was because they were copying what happened in Petra, because they also went counterclockwise 7 times. But if you really want to know the real reason, you need to go back to this building here. That's the oldest picture I could find of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. When you go to Jerusalem, you will notice that there is a pilgrimage, that's where the pilgrims went, the Jewish pilgrims. And they would go 7 times going counterclockwise. Why 7 and why counterclockwise? Because of Jericho. The Israelites were demanded to go 7 times counterclockwise around the city of Jericho and to blow the trumpets, and the walls came tumbling down. That's why all the pilgrims have been doing that in not Jericho now, in Jerusalem. After they circumambulate 7 times going counterclockwise, then the Muslims have to then run back and forth between Safa and Marwa. Safa and Marwa are the 2 mountains that Hagar is looking for water, and they're just about 100 yards away from the Kaaba. So they're right next to the Kaaba, right? But when you look at them, you notice that they're not mountains, they're just rocks, about 20 feet high. Rocks don't make mountains, folk. You don't find water in rocks that are just 20 feet high that kids can climb on. So obviously these are not the original Safa and Marwa. These are nothing more than facsimiles or small models of the original Safa and Marwa. Are you getting that? So where is the original Safa and Marwa? Well, Dan Gibson believes it could be in Petra, which I agree, it probably was in Petra, but where is the one before Petra? Petra is nothing more than a facsimile of the original one. To get to the original one, you need to go back another few hundred years. You need to go back to 70 AD. You need to go back to Jerusalem. You need to go back to Mount Moriah, where the Kaaba stood. Remember, Kaaba just means cube in Arabic. It's the same word in Hebrew, Kaaba, cube. And where was the cube? In the temple, in the Holy of Holies, was the cube. The same cube that the Jews would circumambulate 7 times. And then they would go down from Moriah, Mount Moriah, which in Arabic is Marwa. It's the same word in Arabic. Josephus refers to it as Marwa in the 2nd century. And then they go down to the Kidron Valley there. They're the Kidron Valley. You can't see it. Can you see the Kidron Valley there? And then they'd go up to Mount Scopus on the other side. Those are mountains. Mount Scopus in Arabic is Safa. So the original Marwa, the original Safa are in Jerusalem. The Muslims have just copied what's in Jerusalem. They don't make anything up new. Everything they do, they copied. They're great at plagiarizing. Now, when you look at the 5 stages of the Hajj, you will see that much of this have been borrowed. The Kaaba in Mecca comes from Jerusalem, there in Mount Moriah. The Marwa and Safa come also from Jerusalem. The Marwa is Moriah, and Safa would be Mount Scopus. The hill of Arabia of the Arafat, Mecca, is also the Arafat in Petra. And then the Jamarats, the one stone. Now here's what's interesting. Notice this picture on the far left. You can see there's one pillar. That's the old pillar that all the Muslims were throwing stones at because this was the devil. And they were throwing stones to kill the devil. The problem was there are so many pilgrims throwing stones that they were missing. They weren't good shots, and they were hitting people in front, and they were dying from being hit. So they had to redo this to this one up here. So you can see where it now it's now 3 towers, multi-storied, all air-conditioned inside. So when you throw stones, you don't hit anybody, and they fall down, and they recollect the stones, and you pay it all over again. And they're making a lot of money off of it. But so what are they doing now? If there are 3 towers, does that mean 3 devils? Since 1980, when they reconstructed and made these new 3 towers, they now have a new story. It's not the 3 devils, it's now the 3 temptations of Abraham. So, how many people were alive in 1980? You were alive while the new tradition has been created. Notice they're still creating new traditions. Traditions are still being made. So if traditions are still being made in the 20th century, why should we not be surprised that we're going to see traditions being created and recreated and deleted and accreted and corrupted all the way through the first 3 centuries? Oh, did I say 3 centuries? I'm going to change that after the break. You're going to see traditions get created as they need it. They always are changing traditions, even as something as important about that. The Zamzam well is also, there's a Zamzam well in Petra, but it looks like this is the original antecedent to the Zamzam well is the Pool of Siloam there in Jerusalem. And then we get to the black stone. What are we going to do with that black stone? When the Muslims circumambulate 7 times around the Kaaba, on the eastern corner is this stone that you see right here. And now they call it the black stone, but it's not really. It's actually 8 pebbles within tar. So the tar is black, and that's why it looks like a black stone. It used to be 1 stone. To look at that, you need to ask, pay attention to this stone. This is something we have yet to really do an awful lot of study on. It was possibly a meteorite discovered by the Phoenicians in 300 to 400 BC and worshipped as a gift from God as it flew across the sky. The Romans brought it to their territories in the 1st century BC. The Roman Emperor Aurelius Antonius Elagabalus moved it to Damascus before he was assassinated in the 3rd century AD and started the belief that wherever the black stone was, so was the presence of God. It was then moved to Petra in the 7th century. Ibn Zubair in 687 destroyed much of Petra and sent his women and children and the black stone down to what later became Mecca. And the pilgrims started to go to Mecca because that was where God's presence was. So the Abbasids allied themselves with Zubair's descendants because of the black stone and possibly built the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca around 697 to house it, where it still remains today to forgive sins. That's why they can't get rid of it. It is as idolatrous as you can get. Now, even when you look at the Quran, you notice that the Arabic in the Quran does not fit the Hijaz. The Arabic in the Quran is actually Nabatean Aramaic. But the Arabic that they would have used in this part of the world, where the Hijaz is, where Mecca, Medina, is Sabaic Arabic. Sabaic Arabic does not have the ihrab, the unstressed inflectional short final vowels. The tar marbuta, which looks like a circle with 2 dots above it to give it a feminine form. And the alif maksura looks like an S shape to give the E sound. Or the definite article, al, before a word. These are not found in Sabaic Arabic. Yet the Quran is full of these, proving that the Quran had to have been written up here, not down here, where Muslims say it was written. Sabaic Arabic, which was from down here in the Sabaeans, that's the Arabic they spoke up here. Interestingly, Quranic Arabic existed 600 miles further north, while the 7th century Arabic of Mecca in the Hijaz would have accommodated the text of the Quran had it been used eradicating the Qiraat problems later on. We're going to get to the Qiraat. Had they used Sabaic Arabic, we wouldn't have had the problems with it we do have today with the many different varied forms of the Arabic. We'll get that after the break. So when was Mecca possibly constructed? Let's ask the rocks. Here is the rock that they have now destroyed. So we have pictures of it, but now the Arabs have now, Saudi Arabian government has destroyed this rock because it is causing too many problems. Says this was written in the year the Masjid al-Haram, notice doesn't say Kaaba, doesn't say Mecca, the Masjid al-Haram was built in the 78th year. Note the word bunya, which was built, is nothing like uida binawuha, which means was rebuilt. We can assume that this inscription, which is located about 75 kilometers from Mecca on the route to Taif, so it's above Mecca up near Taif, refers to the site of the Masjid al-Haram, which later became Mecca in the Hijaz. This would suggest that the Kaaba and thus Mecca were built around 697 to 698. Because 78 years after 622 would make it 698. Thus it was constructed during the reign of Abd al-Malik in the late 7th century and not at the time of Adam and Eve, nor even during the time of Muhammad. So let's now conclude with Mecca. We know that you have to have all 3 legs. If you start to shut down Mecca, you shut down the other 2. Since it is the earliest and most important city, it has to be the center of the world and therefore certainly the best known. Yet when you look at the lush vegetation that he refers to in the traditions with grass, grains, trees, streams, fruit, you cannot make sense of that because there's none of that in even Mecca today, except that's which is imported in. When you look at the Quran itself, it only refers to Mecca 1 time. And the Arabic which is used there is Nabatean Aramaic. It's from 600 miles further north. All of the geographical locations are located 600 to 1,000 miles further north. What's more, when you look at all the 7th century Arabs, what do they call themselves? If you look at all their references, if you look at all their documentation, they give themselves 5 names, these Arabs. They call themselves Ishmaelites because they're in the line of Ishmael. They call themselves Hagarins because they're in the line of Hagar. They call themselves Muhajiruns, which means people of Hagar. They call themselves Maghreits, place of Hagar. And they call themselves, or they were called, Saracens, which means plunderers. Plunderers from the land of sin. Why is it they don't call themselves Muslims? If that was the name that was given to them, according to the Quran, from the time Muhammad instituted in 622. Or 621, excuse me. So you can see there's a real problem. All of the prophets that are buried there, we can't find any of them. Even in the foundations that they are now, that they're eradicating, and they're basically cementing the whole place up. Patricia Karun couldn't find any reference to Mecca and any of the civilizations. Even the lesser known towns were well referred to. And the reason's very clear. These towns are all up on the Western Plateau. Mecca is 3,000 feet too far down. More than that, neither the land trade route nor the Red Sea trade route show that there was no trade through Mecca. All the trade was maritime, as you suggested. Yeah, go ahead.
Could they argue that being that it was so dry and desert-like, that all the artifacts, maybe the clay pottery and the bones, all just kind of disintegrated, and that's why you can't find them?
Actually, it'd be just the opposite. Yeah. The drier it is, the better it's preserved. It's water that destroys artifacts.
I was just wondering if that would be an argument.
It goes just the opposite in your argument. Yeah. Think it through. Yeah. The fact that it's so dry means that it should be there. Yeah. It's because of water. That's what destroys artifacts. The dry part makes sense. And look at the Dead Sea Scrolls. Mm-hmm. Why is the Dead Sea Scrolls are still preserved today, 2,000 years later, well, 2,100 years later? Because it's dry. It's below sea level. Yeah. The fact that it is so dry preserves it. Yeah. Okay, so just the opposite of what you're saying. Okay? Mecca before 741 just is not documented. There's no reference, and that's in the wrong place. It's not on any of the maps. The Europeans who put the maps are show that it has never been referred to, and the reason why, there's just no water. No water, no food, no people, no towns, no cities, no history, no civilization. Oh, I love to say that. It's just so easy, because anytime Muslims bring it out, say, wait a minute, no water. And that shuts down the conversation. It's like a meme. Just say it, and that shuts down the conversation. The Zamzam well makes no sense because we know all the Zamzam well and all the water that's supplied comes from desalination plants, thanks to God for America and Canada and Spain. And of course the Qiblas are all facing the wrong place. They're all facing too far north. So when you look at even the Hajj, take a look at all the Hajj. That's just basically plagiarizing what was already in Jerusalem. They just plagiarized the Jews. So therefore, in conclusion, certainly someone, somewhere, at some time, should have known about this city, yet no one anywhere, nor at any time has, proving that it has never existed at the time of Muhammad, nor during the early Islam. So if Mecca did not exist, then what Muhammad are Muslims referring to? His Muhammad, or their Muhammad, has to have been born and grown up there until he was 52. And that's what we're going to do, Lex. Let's go have a break.